Water policy has long been a controversial topic that hasn't been helped by regular droughts and a climate that's increasingly variable. Add to that a federated system of government and a river system that runs through multiple states, and there's never a dull moment. Our guest today is Melinda Pavey, who grew up on a dairy farm and worked as a journalist, so hopefully she'll feel right at home today as a farm writer. I note she's visiting one of the dairy farms in her electorate today rather than sitting in an office, and I hope it is a lot warmer there than it is in Sydney. Melinda entered New South Wales Parliament in 2002, nominating for a vacant position in the upper house at just 33 years of age, and she switched to the lower house after winning the North Coast seat of Oxley at the 2015 election. In that time, she's held a number of portfolios and was appointed Minister for Water, Property and Housing just over a year ago. There's finally water flowing down the Darling River into the Murray, but the drought's definitely not over for much of the state. Minister, I'll hand over to you for a few thoughts on what it all means for irrigators and for regional communities in New South Wales.
Hi Karen, I'm Melinda Pavey, and this is my friend Sue McGinn.
Hello.
This is her dairy farm, and her husband Brett's having his lunchtime break. And yes, I thought I'd try and make COVID austerity and measures a little bit more warm today. And as you mentioned, Karen, I did grow up on a dairy farm, but don't tell anybody. It was actually in Victoria, so I'm a Victorian by birth, and so have a very proper and good understanding of the value of irrigation and the trauma of irrigation and policies and the changes that many of us have faced dealing with the over-allocation over many years. So I stand here also looking out on a wetland, and the last time I was here, this wetland was bone dry for about 12 months. We actually had salt inundation. So the drought that we've all gone through has been very profound. In fact, Kempsey and even a city like Port Macquarie and Bellingen in my community and Taree on the Manning came perilously close to running out of water. But the rains of the summer have been life-saving and very, very important. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about myself, but just a couple of high points. Since having the portfolio now for about 13 months, we are now in the biggest water infrastructure building period since World War II in New South Wales. We have 3 dams on the go. And I know there's a lot of cynicism, and there's still a lot of cynicism even in the communities where those dams are going into. But we've signed up with our delivery partner, KBR Orico, about 2 weeks ago out at Dungowan Dam at Tamworth. And to get another 650 gigalitres into Wyangla Dam is going to be incredible for security, and I would also argue for the environment. I am clearly on the side of farmers and the productive sector, but I'm equally on the side of the environment. And I think it is vital that we start not making it a war between the two sides. It's actually security for both. I make the point to those that continually downgrade the value of irrigation and the productive sector and want more and more and more. We wouldn't have any water now today in the Peel River, the Namoy. The Murray would probably be dry again as it was on the first day of Federation. We have kept our fish species, our platypi, our environment going off the back of the infrastructure in dams across Australia and New South Wales. And I would argue that water security and storage is a very much the tenet of a civilised society, and that is why I support very positively our infrastructure development, knowing that we are going into a period of climate change, that we are going to have drier periods, and we're also potentially going to have wetter periods. So we need to have that infrastructure to capture that water when we need it most. I'm also very proud of my government in the water space through this most terrible drought. I think at latest count, there's been something like $80 million in rebates and refunds to on water licences for farmers across New South Wales. Since the March election, there's been around $230 million committed, almost $250 million committed to ensuring that we get pipelines and capacity so our towns don't run out of water. And we haven't let out our breath yet. We've still got big challenges in Tamworth, and very pleased that I've been able to work well in the last couple of weeks with the support of the member for Tamworth, Kevin Anderson, in ensuring that that we get the pipeline working that we just spent $35 million on from Chaffey Dam, so that we can minimise those conveyance losses and get another year in the water supply for the Tamworth community. We're also challenged, we still need some big rains in the middle of New South Wales, and so that we can get Wyangla filled, Hume, Dartmouth, Burrinjuck, all of the systems need some good winter rains. And I do hope, fingers crossed, pray, whatever it takes, that those winter rains, as predicted by the Bureau of Meteorology, actually fall, and we can get back to some type of normal. Someone asked me the other day what was the happiest moment in my time now as Water Minister. There's been plenty of anxious, unhappy moments, but I think the happiest was walking with Rachel on the banks of the Darling River, and knowing that about 50 kilometres up the road that they were about to release the water from the Menindee. And knowing that Rachel then sent me photos a couple of weeks later, it arrived at Easter as predicted, those rains. And there is some general security allocation for the Lower Darling. Also very proud that finally we got some action on Tooral Station that was taken out of the productive sector to return water to the environment some 13 years ago. Nothing had happened until I came to the portfolio and got some things moving so that water can also be returned to the Darling. And also, of course, standing there and being part of the announcements on the 3 dams that we're going to build, Dungowan, Wyangla and Mole River on the Queensland border. So I could talk forever, but I'd be more happy taking your questions and engaging in a really good lunch. It's not going to be a normal Friday long lunch, but I think those normal Friday long lunches finished in about the 80s. But here's my lunch. And it's not a free lunch. I don't even get lunch. But I hope you're all safe and keeping well. It's a very difficult time for our state and nation. And I think together we're coming out of it well. But I'm determined to ensure that our farmers, our productive sector, our irrigators are front and centre of a recovery out of drought and out of COVID.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Minister. So as we mentioned, we have the Q&A function that's open. If anyone wants to ask some questions, we've already got some that are coming in, but as we promised, we're going to start off with a couple of the ones that were sent to us early on. One came from Katrina Heffer. I'm not sure where she's come from. When her email came in, she didn't mention it. She wants us to ask you why you haven't given Mick Kelty the powers normally afforded to an Inspector General so he can stamp out the corruption in the water space. For example, what's going on with Murrumbidgee irrigation? And why do you keep handing farmers who send you complaints on to government authorities that you fully know have no jurisdiction over them?
I don't agree with any of the premise of Katrina's question. In fact, we have in New South Wales over the past 15 months investing $28 million a year into NRA, the Natural Resource Regulator, to ensure that we stamp out corruption or water theft, whatever you want to call it. Mick Kelty has been told by me, and in person and in writing, our books and our doors are absolutely open for him to come and have a look at anything he needs to look at. There is nothing to prevent that, and he has had a look. There's nothing to stop that. So I'm not going to buy into this conspiracy stuff. He is more than welcome at any point and has taken that opportunity. In fact, I'll finish the answer to this question on what Mick Kelty said. He said New South Wales is now at the front of compliance. They are the ones that the rest of the state should be following. We're investing a lot of taxpayer dollar in that, a lot of water users' money in that, to ensure we restore integrity, trust and faith in our water across New South Wales.
Thank you. So one of the other questions that we've had is that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. That's come from Keith Richards from Baronga, and I hope I've pronounced that right. He says irrigators in the Southern Basin have had compulsory telemetric metering for several years. Why is it that Northern Basin irrigators apparently have until 2025 to install their meters? Haven't they had enough time already to get their act together?
Keith, I agree with the premise of your question. If you can't manage it, you can't measure it. Sorry, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And that is what a lot of ministers and jurisdictions have been working towards for the past, probably 6-7 years. And that is why we created the framework before the rains that we knew were coming to license some of that floodplain harvesting so we can manage it. But I'm not going to continue or be part of a north versus south debate. I get accused when I'm in the south supporting the north, and when I'm in the north they say, well, aren't you from Victoria? So I just want to show the leadership that's required to get the outcomes that we need to restore faith. And having people fighting cheap political potshots is not the way to solve that. We have had some mechanical and some challenges within government getting the right equipment. I had met with the Hawkesbury farmers this week. They've got telemetric systems that whenever they get a flood, because the river can rise up to 18 metres, the telemetric system breaks down and doesn't work. So it's not as easy as a one-sentence answer. It's complicated, but we are moving towards that. And yes, you could argue there's been plenty of time. I've been in this position now for 14 months. We're working towards that and agree with your premise. To be able to measure it makes you able to manage it better.
All right, and probably a good follow-on question from that from the land. As Water Minister, how might you move forward on bringing the North and the South together and perhaps try and turn around the growing division between water users in those different regions, given that there's apparently a growing level of antagonism between the North and the South?
It's a great question, and that antagonism is exacerbated by the drought that we've been in. To have the South for the third year without good general security allocations is stressful. I get that. I know that we have to do something to enable a rice crop in the South to be grown. But if I'm in Balmain, they'll be telling me we shouldn't be growing rice in Australia. So it is a very difficult thing. And that exacerbation and that frustration and that bitterness has got worse through the drought. There is no doubt about it. But that's where I need the leadership from the New South Wales Irrigators Council, the National Irrigators Council, New South Wales Farmers, National Farmers Federation. We have a whole bunch of people that are opposed to what we do that work more cleverly, more strategically, more in alignment than what the industry groups purporting to support agriculture do. I mean, when my Deputy Premier and leader, National Party leader John Barilaro suggested food security was at risk, we had the National Farmers Federation come out and attack him. What John Barilaro was saying is we do have food security in relation to rice. For the past couple of years, we've only grown about 10% of our crop capacity. There's a whole number of reasons for that, and drought is the major, but there are some other reasons. But I think the Australian people, especially through COVID, know that we should, because we have the capacity to actually be a net exporter of rice, we need to get to that position. I mean, I know that the federal government has had conversations with Vietnam and Thailand concerned about rice quotas and export, because Australian people would expect and demand to have rice in their supermarkets. And that rice security is at risk. Yes, of course, 70% of what we grow and produce is exported. We are one of the luckiest countries on the planet. But where we have crises, we should deal with it. So there's a very long answer to a question that is a tough question. And it's made worse. This week we've had the Shooters Party, Helen Dalton from the Shooters Party and her party agreeing with a Greens elected member of the upper house that we should go to drought on record. We shouldn't be giving any allocations at all at this time, despite the rains in some of the places we've had it. So, I think we've got to be careful, who speaks for us and what they say. But it is a tough gig, but it requires leadership. And I have enjoyed meeting some of the good leaders in this industry. Some of the conversations I've had with some of the best farmers I've ever met. whether that's with the Mayor of Wentworth, Melissa at her orange production factory, just at Wentworth, sorry, not factory, well they just incredible farm. Her husband was so frustrated as we drove past a pipe that had the tiniest of trickle falling out of it because it wasn't going right to the tree stump. That is the excitement that I see, the capacity of our smart people and those little engineering plants that exist in Wentworth or Mildura or Griffith, where we've got such innovation and capacity. That's what excites me. That's who I fight for every day. Whether it's the little farmer or the big farmer, you know, we need to support each other and not turn on each other. We've got to turn united on the greater enemy that wants to take our water away.
That may be a nice lead in to one of the other pre-submitted questions that we had, which came from Daniel Kemp of PEI Media. He wants to know what your views are on private investors' involvement in owning water entitlements, particularly where they don't own associated farmland, and whether you have any concerns over foreign investors owning water entitlements in the Murray Darling Basin.
This is one of those issues that becomes difficult because it becomes jingoistic. It becomes us versus them. And it's a very easy discussion and argument to be having when we have a drought. You know, whether you are a Chinese investor, an American investor, a Canadian investor, a UK investor, a Japanese investor, you can't put that land or that water in your suitcase and take it away. We are a part of an international economy. 70% of what we do, we export. So we can't have our cake and eat it too, shut down the borders when we want to. We need that international investment. We need to be part of, you know, the most important nation in the Southern Hemisphere in terms of capacity, in terms of mining and in terms of agriculture. But this is a really difficult question because the decisions that separated land and water were not made by me. They were made in the 90s and they were made off the back of advice of farmers that that's what they wanted. So to go back and rewrite and recast history is a very difficult thing. But I am looking forward very much to Mick Kelty's review, which should come to us at the end of this month. He's been commissioned, sorry, not Mick Kelty, Mick Keogh, wrong Mick. Mick Keogh's review that is coming to us in the next few weeks, I understand from conversations with the Commonwealth. That's going to be a really important foundational document which will give us the capacity to give some transparency to that water ownership so the conspiracies can be, I believe, put to rest, or if we need to take further action, we can do that. But, you know, I'm getting, you know, criticised and lambasted by the Shooters Party this week because I didn't want to accept a water transparency or water register bill for the general public. Well, there's a very good reason for that. One, New South Wales going it alone is quite silly. We need to be doing it in tandem with the Commonwealth. It would be appropriate to wait for a report and recommendations from Mick Keogh's report. But I am in support with the general premise that the big irrigators be part of it. You know, whether you be a big international conglomerate, a big corporate farm, or a big family farm, such as Helen Dalton. She actually failed to put water trading into her water transparency bill in the Parliament. We argued that the bill should actually have water trading in it, because if you have something like $17 million in water entitlements, which is what the case is with Helen Dalton, as per her pecuniary interest, which she was incumbent on her to put on her pecuniary interest, that entitlement. And I bear her no bad will for that. I think she and her husband and her family have been successful, incredible farmers. But don't go and tell everyone to point over there when you're trying to avoid pointing over here. She is a very successful irrigator with $17 million in entitlements, and my bill ensured that when she does her water trades, that's included, as for any other member of the New South Wales Parliament.
That's probably a nice lead in. We've got a couple more questions that were submitted by the land, but we'll go on to the ones that are being submitted by participants in the webinar now. One of those is nicely following on. It's from an anonymous attendee. Minister, the water debate is often dominated by poorly informed or just plain false arguments. How do we fact check such claims to make the debate better and more constructive?
Well, Karen and anonymous person, that has just got a whole lot more difficult. It breaks my heart to see major media, papers, newspapers throughout our region not publish, not having the resources for our great journalists to do the investigative work. That is a problem to be able to ensure there is accountability and truth in the discussions. Yes, it's easy to get people concerned, and I got that concern when I was down in the Murray over the past 12 months. To see a river flowing at minor flood when we're in the middle of a drought defies common sense to average people, defies common sense to everybody, I think. So that challenge and that hysteria and that anger, when they look out on their river system that's running at a minor flood, I understand that. And that is what has perpetuated the myth and the misunderstandings, which is why I think that it is very difficult to get that water literacy up there when you have such a complicated system. You know, even in my own agency, sometimes it's getting better and we're getting there and we've got some reforms happening, but I can get different sets of advice. Things need to be better. And, we've been doing a lot of research in my office in the last couple of weeks on this, following some very frustrating moments and getting some information. Because quite right, and I remember a great conversation with a farmer in a shearing shed just outside of Finley, where they said, why can't we just go to a dashboard and find out where the water is and who's got it and what pool it's in? Like, yeah, that's a really great idea. I'm sorry I've just arrived and they could have done that over the past 10 years. Because in 2008, the Bureau of Meteorology was given $53 million as part of the Murray Darling Basin plan to actually do exactly that. And I can't see any evidence of it. So Water New South Wales has got some reasonable dashboards. Department of Industry Water have put some stuff up online, which I'm getting some positive feedback. But it needs to be interconnected. It needs to be available and it needs to be easy to get to. And we're working on some solutions for that. And it's a really good question, and until we get some of that stuff right, until we get some better fact-checking and accountability from the critics, and, I'm happy to be, analysed and criticised and, fact-checked and all of those things. But we need to be, as I go back to something I said 20 minutes ago, there needs to be a little bit more respect out there.
Now, a question that I think a lot of people will want an answer to from former Senator and New South Wales Farm Riders member David Leyonhjelm. Do you agree that South Australia receives an inequitable benefit from the Murray Darling Basin plan?
Oh, David, why didn't you do something while you're in the Senate? It's tough, David, isn't it? All I can say is New South Wales has got no more water to give. It's a tricky one, I think about a meeting I had the other day with some people at Tamworth who run the rowing regatta club at Lake Keepit Dam. They had to close their dam down, their activities during the drought because there's no water in Keepit. Yet, the lower lakes were thriving and everyone was able to put their sailing yachts there. It's a really difficult question, David. As you know, legislation would need to change at a federal level. I don't think that's necessarily something we should run away from. We just need to have good conversations, respectful conversations, and work out what is in the nation's best interests. As I go back to talking about rice, we need to have, that sector here. It is a good product. What we have done in rice around the world, we've actually helped reduce water consumption for rice production by around 30%. We have the highest yielding rates of rice production and growth in the world. So we are great farmers. We just need to be able to add water to make that happen. And the other part, of course, with rice is you only put the crop in if you've got a water supply, if you've got some allocation. So I think COVID actually gives us an opportunity to have some more mature conversations in the national interest, and I'm happy to pursue that.
While we're on the subject of rice growers, a question that was submitted from The Land. With the groundwater in the Riverina, are there any plans to address the high levels of carryover of up to 200%, which has been raised by some irrigators as problematic because it's impacting on the reliability of allocations?
I'm not across the detail of that question, Karen, and The Land, and I'd be happy to take some more information and get some follow-up on that.
Okay, to quote Q&A, we will take that one on notice. There are a couple of questions in here from anonymous attendee, and I'm not sure if it's the same person or multiple anonymous attendees, about floodplain harvesting. Whether it was legal before your regulation on the 7th of February this year, whether you agree that most of the water floodplain harvested is done via gravity-fed systems, and whether the NRAR has said anything to you with respect to their views, and if so, can you share their views on floodplain harvesting?
Okay. Gravity is everything to do with floodplain harvesting, and it's about capturing excess water in big events. Yes, there's been a lot of histrionics and about what happened in those events in January. I just want to make it really clear. Me as Minister, had nothing to do with any decisions that were made. So any aspersions being cast are being cast at people that work for the Department of Fisheries, the Department of Environment, the Department of Industry Water, and Water New South Wales. So they as a group made decisions during that flood, during that magnificent rain event, because they were getting information from farmers and people in those communities, just remembering they were about to put sandbags out at Narrabri. There was some very deep rain cells that had a big impact. And it was those officials, those public servants, that made a decision that for 3 days of the 30-day event, that there would be a lifting of the embargo on floodplain harvesting in a certain patch. Now, it turns out, I think it might have been something like 30 gigalitres. So they've done some measurements, which was released recently. There was about 30 gigalitres of a 350 gigalitre event to avoid damage to infrastructure. Now, that wasn't my decision. That was a decision made by people in a room after some very heavy rainfalls, which NRA and an independent panel of experts, including Wendy Craig and leading environmental experts, are going to look at the management of that event and take our learnings. But let's be proud of that management of that event and look at the water we have in Menindee, look at the water we have flowing down the Darling. Look at how we've actually changed the management. So everyone just went to their corners and thought the worst. Now I can understand why they might have thought the worst, but I think history will show it was the start and the change in the management of floodplain harvesting. And I think, that is a good thing. We need to give certainty. We need to be able to measure it. We need to be able to manage it. And in terms of, legalising that event, that order that we signed before that event, that was about a process of measuring it. It had taken place. So I know there's been a lot of opportunities for cheap shots, but it was good. It was a good outcome after a very dry event. And I know people that weren't getting water at the time wanted to see it in the worst possible eyes. But, there are towns in the north, as there are towns in the south, that have hurt, and we've got to work together to support each other.
There's a nice follow-on question from that, although it was submitted beforehand, from Benjamin Horn. If Mick Veitch and the committee reviewing the water management amendment, the exemptions to floodplain harvesting regulation, find it to be invalid, will you direct the NRAR to prosecute the irrigators harvesting water, and if not, why not?
I'm not going to deal in hypotheticals. We have an upper house inquiry going on. Mick Veitch of the Labor Party is a fairly decent bloke. He's a shearer. He's from country New South Wales. I think I hope and would expect he'd run a good inquiry, an honest inquiry. And Clayton Barr, who's my shadow water minister. Again, he's from Cessnock, and it's good to have some country, some people from the Labor Party living in the country on the front bench of the opposition. I think, I know what they'll find because I know what the truth is, and I think, we'll look at those recommendations genuinely. And I think, the comments from the member for Murray representing the Shooters Party is often quite at odds with the comments from the member for Barwon who represents the Shooters as well. So again, this requires leadership and strength. It doesn't require cheap shots.
All right, now we've had a response from David Lionhelm. He instigated a Senate inquiry and chaired that, and then the government ignored that, to go back to your point of whether he could have done something while he was in the Senate. We have a question from Peter Arkle from New South Wales Farmers. What is the Minister planning to do to return voluntary contributions to water entitlement holders in the Southern Connected Basin who provided the water to the environment in good faith in the early 2000s under a temporary arrangement, never to have it returned?
Peter, there have certainly been a lot of legacy issues that we've had to manage and deal with since I took on the agency, and that is one of them. There is a lot of frustration at the changes, and I think those frustrations are then made worse by, seeing neighbours and value of water entitlements and some of the unfairness. I can just say, along with many other things, that is something we are working on. But every decision that we make will be based on law, science, and fact.
Sue Hardman from Hardman Communications has harked back to your opening statement where you talked about farmers and the environment being on opposite sides, and asks, do you feel this gap is closing, and where do you see the shared goals and values between farmers and the environment that we can leverage for better outcomes on what is a highly emotive issue?
I think it has probably got worse because of the drought. I've never had somebody that represents the environment groups ever say, well, if it wasn't for the dams, the rivers would be empty and the fish would, all be challenged. So I think it's about how we work together in government as well. There is a lot of conflict even between the advice we receive within government, depending on the agency. And I think working off science, and can I also say there's been a perception too that has been a perception that's created a very negative narrative around the north of the state, and we need to address that. And I think we addressed it with NRA, backed in, as I said, by comments like Mick Kelding made, that we actually, we're the leaders now in accountability and integrity and making the system work and ensure that every water is valued and measured and counted and not inappropriately taken. So it's going to take some time. I think it's a really good question, and it's something I struggle with a lot because, I used to go fishing on the Murray River with my grandmother, and there was nothing made her more happy, not even us arriving and catching a Murray cod. So I think that is, a really important part of understanding that farmers are environmentalists and great environmentalists. And, we need to be able to talk about the sustainability and the importance of our communities and our wealth. And, I think some of those conversations have been missing at a Murray Darling authority level, certainly at a Commonwealth environmental water holder level. I was, very annoyed to learn, last October or whenever it was that, we just dropped 22 gigalitres of water from Wyangla Dam, and Wyangla Dam today is only at about 13.5%. And the Commonwealth's response was, well, you knew about it, New South Wales. Well, no, I didn't know about it as the Water Minister. Water New South Wales made the transaction because they're the river operator and the dam operator. But there was conversations that went on within the Environment Department, but there was never a thought of bringing all those conversations together. So, that is not an optimal outcome, but we've got to learn from those challenges and those issues and make better decisions into the future. And yes, I don't have a clear and concise answer to that because, it's something that I don't, we just must work together, and we've got to get the narrative better.
All right, we've had a question from Craig Shapiro. While the drought will break soon, the issue of efficient use of water will still be an ongoing issue. How do you see innovation playing a role in driving more efficient water use by the agricultural community? And does COVID-19 give us an opportunity to do more to drive water innovation?
I think it does. Absolutely, I think it does. And I also look, there's still, an enormous amount of money sitting within the Murray Darling Basin Authority that could drive some of that innovation and that opportunity. But we've also got to be able to measure it at the same time. And Craig, the work that you're doing out of Wagra and the Riverina, partnering up with our tertiary institutions is brilliant. And I think, whatever, and you've come to the table very genuinely. You haven't come to the table with your hand out. You've got some great ideas for your producers and your enterprise, and that's the way we've got to work. As I was in Israel in November, what that government and administration spends on innovation, I think it's something like 30% of the GDP is just going into startups, into innovation, something to behold. And if we can and be part of that smart economy, and we actually have it out there. We actually have it operating. As I mentioned, that citrus production out at Wentworth, there's some really clever things going on. And technology and COVID has shown that we can actually get that information to each other a lot easier. We don't have to travel thousands of kilometres. We can, communicate really well with each other, well, as best as we can with an iPad like this.
And a follow-up question on innovation from Andrew Marshall at The Land. Given the seriously low water levels in our major irrigation dams across New South Wales, and despite good rain in many areas, has the drought prompted the New South Wales Government to give further thought to cloud seeding over major catchment areas to improve reliability in the Murray Darling Basin?
No, that hasn't come across my desk, Andrew, but I do remember working with Ian Armstrong when the cloud seeding started in the Snowy. So some would argue it's not working that well because of the levels of human Dartmouth and Burrinjuck. But I think, we should not close our door on any level of innovation or opportunity to be clever and create more rain and precipitation and get those dams full. But, actually, I'd love to catch up with you, Andrew, to talk about it and what you know.
Okay, we have a question from Jackie Kruger from Leeton Shire, who says, hello, Minister, thank you for your time today. Does the New South Wales Government have any strategies in place or any advice to offer to irrigators in regards to how general security entitlements can achieve more certainty? General security water is critically important for diversity and very important for manufacturing sectors in New South Wales.
Jackie, you're right on all fronts. I mean, the only way we can get certainty for general security is some more rain, obviously. It is a product, that you probably know 10 times more than I do, but the South Australian farmers and the Victorian farmers aren't as reliant on, but it is the basis of many of the sectors that have grown in New South Wales, whether it's, particularly rice and cotton and cropping. So how we guarantee more of it or more security is tricky because we know what water we have and we know what bucket we have. I would be encouraging, I think farmers through the Riverina and the Murrumbidgee and the Murray at the moment need, some certainty too about price, about what they're going to get if they put a rice crop in. So it's not just government that control that conversation, it's also the private sector. There's a lot of people on the side of rice within government in New South Wales. it's a difficult issue when you just don't have the allocations, and we've got to look to maximising what we have and working collaboratively.
Okay, we have a question from Matthew Plunkett. Can the Minister please share any insights on the review of the water sharing plans the NRC are undertaking and any themes that are emerging from consultations, particularly along the coast?
It's a good question. My understanding, the NRC is focusing a little bit on the Peel and around the Tamworth region. I haven't seen the final work that is associated with, but I do know that NRA is concentrating a lot of work on the coast, which is our water police, the natural resource regulator, and we do have some challenges in terms of, again, water literacy, farmers making decisions without understanding the full context of their rights and responsibilities. But I might take the opportunity here just to quickly talk about harvestable rights. That is something that, as a local member for Oxley, it has been something I've wanted a review and some reform of since I entered Parliament. Those of you that have been around long enough probably realise that harvestable rights were brought in 1999 by the Carr administration. They were meant to be reviewed after a couple of years, and that is where a 10% flat take for the whole of New South Wales was put on. Of 10% of the water that falls on a farm could only be captured. That 10%, whether you're on the east coast or whether you're on the west, well, aside from the Western Division where you can actually put any dam size you want in. So that has never been reviewed, which is what we're in the process of starting and releasing a paper on. And I do think, and common sense would suggest that there is a different perspective that we could take here on the coast, given we've got 3 times the amount of rainfall. And you could have 200 millimetres of rain at Corindi, for example, north of Woolgoolga, which finds its way to the ocean in about 30 minutes. So it's a different rainfall, it's a different system. And unlike the inland, the coast don't have major publicly funded dams and infrastructure. So that is, that's a big issue that we need to deal with, as well as compliance and as well as dealing with some of those NRC recommendations.
Okay, going back to the other side of the state, another question from the land. Given Menindee has started to fill again, are there any plans being developed on how to better management flows out of Menindee and prevent future fish kills? And also, how is the DPI Fish Recovery ARC program going?
Okay, 2 really good questions. In terms of the DPI ARC program, I can't give you an answer, and I'll take that one on notice. But I've been a part of a couple of conversations within my office recently, worrying about whether we've got data and funding to actually assess and judge how some of our environmental and fish sustainability programs are going. But in terms of Menindee, really great question. As I mentioned at the beginning, very proud that we finally got some movement on Terrell Station and some more capacity to come down the Darling. I think managing Menindee so it stays within New South Wales's management. I think the figure's at 640, then it goes to the Commonwealth through the Murray Darling Basin plan. Keeping it within our control and managing our water for our citizens is really important, and we've got work and a focus on that currently. So yeah, a really amazing rain event. It spilled over into the second dam. Some of the data we were getting from our agencies was a bit slower than some of the data we were getting from some other analysts, which is interesting. But we're open to that issue and ensuring that we've got communication at all levels, making sure we get data at real time. But the positive thing is there's a good liquor water in Menindee, and we need to keep it there as long as possible, and having it in New South Wales management is the best way to achieve that.
Okay, we only have time for a couple more questions. Another one from an anonymous attendee. Minister, the Murray Darling Basin plan has provided a lot more water for the environment, a lot of it on private property. Is it still appropriate that government-owned water is providing a private benefit is it acceptable that we're allowing grazing on Ramsar wetlands?
I'm not, in terms of grazing on Ramsar wetlands, there's a lot of history. There's a lot of history behind those decisions and arrangements. Again, I don't want to, start saying one or the other. It is an important thing that we have the best outcomes for the environment. We have given a lot to the environment. I'm really excited about some of the work we've done down in the Moran with the cultural water that's available. Let's look at ways of improving on-country management, involving our Indigenous communities and using that cultural water to grow industries and support each other. So I'm not going to, it is tricky, but there's always two sides to every conversation and discussion. And some of the wetlands that we've supported and nourished over the past decade should be celebrated and acknowledged.
Right, and a nice follow-up question from that, again from an anonymous attendee. What is the government doing to improve First Nations people's access to water?
I'm really excited about the opportunities that there exist. I've got a really good relationship with New South Wales Aboriginal Land Council, and we've got our First Nations groups. It is quite complicated. It's taken me quite a bit to get around the different groups and representatives. But all I can say is I meet great people with great capacity, and I want to be able to work within those groups with those people to ensure that we get a cultural uplift as well as an economic uplift.
Terrific. So one wrap-up question from me. It's been a pretty tough couple of years, a drought exacerbating the tensions over the Murray Darling Basin. You've been in the job for 14 months. What are some of the positives that you've seen over that time and to come out of the drought and the rain that we've had this year?
I tell a story that after I got my first day of briefs in water, and that included Sydney Water, I was facing the situation my first week in the job of putting Sydney on water restrictions. I had Murray Darling Basin Authority briefings. I had this briefing, that briefing. I actually just wanted to get a one-way ticket to Hawaii. Well, anyway, I didn't. I've stayed. I've met some incredible people, and we've achieved some great things. My ministerial team are amazing. A lot of my new agency staff are amazing. I've got to say big shout out to Keith Pitt, our new water minister. He's proving to be very pragmatic and problem solving in his orientation. I've got a great relationship with Lisa Neville in Victoria. Victoria and New South Wales share the same aspirations for our communities and our farmers. We got the Tyrrell station water pumping down, but we faced drought and we faced communities running out of water. We nearly got recycled water happening in Tenterfield because things were so desperate. So we've had some really positive conversations around that. And if only Sydney was as respectful of its water supply and recycling as the bush is, things would be a lot easier in that catchment. But I suppose, the work that we've done in New South Wales, that John Barilaro secured that funding from the sale of Snowy Hydro into water infrastructure. It is no small feat that we're going to have 3 new dams within the next 4 or 5 years in New South Wales, coupled with our cooperation at the Commonwealth, with our federal leadership in Michael McCormack and Gladys Berejiklian, and also backing us in 100% and the Prime Minister. So I'm using this opportunity to really just dig in there, get the job done, get the infrastructure built, and let's get some sensible changes where we need to get them in water management and allocations. Let's not pit the environment against farmers. Let's work together. Let's build our communities. I think what this COVID has shown is, we're still underpopulated and overpopulated in our cities. Let's move some of our population to where we need to be, support the industries that sustain Australia economically, and let's just keep working together.
Minister, thank you so much for your time. That's all we've got time for today. We thank your willingness to turn up. It's a great spot that you've got there on the dairy farm, and you've answered some tough questions today. It's one of the driest continents on the planet, and water policy is definitely not an easy portfolio to hold. So we wish you the best of luck with it, and thank you again for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Karen. For
all of our audience, I hope that you have enjoyed today's webinar. It's a first for the Farm Riders Association of New South Wales, but it's not going to be our last. And I hope that you can keep an eye on our social media accounts for the next one, or sign up through our website if you don't already receive the email notifications. Our website is nswfarmwriters.org.au. Thank you very much.